Good afternoon, everyone. It is heartwarming to see many colleagues tuning in to this jointly sponsored webinar on modesty in Orthodoxy, Jewish and Muslim women. As a council member of SSR and Vice President of ASSJ, welcome. We often attend our separate organizations, conferences, and events, and seldom collaborate across organizations. Hopefully, this is a beginning. Today's webinar brings together young and older researchers studying the Jewish and Muslim communities. In today's political climate, this collaboration is especially valuable. Hopefully, your interest will encourage others to join these explorations, including Muslim scholars, to advance the scientific study of religion and the study of Jewry. Turning now to the presidents of ASJ and SSR, we will start with Professor Judith Boxers-Leverand, the president of ASSJ, and then we'll hear from Professor Gerardo Marti, the president of SSR. I ask everybody to mute, please. Mute your video. And Judith, please, the screen is yours.
Hello to everybody. Good morning, good evening. It is really with great interest and sincere joy that I welcome this fruitful and promising initiative of joint efforts between our associations, the Scientific Study of Religions and the Association for Scientific Study of Jewry, and offer us this webinar on modesty in Orthodox Jewish and Muslim women. The goal of analyzing comparatively the religious, cultural, and social collective meaning, importance, and motivations in Jewish and Muslim worlds of a practice such as modesty carries a high epistemic relevance in its commitment to building robust and new explorations, gender and group-oriented. Human groups cannot be separated from their symbolic structures that guide their action, their practices, representations, the way of seeing the world. They cannot be separated and is specific to each group. Thus, I welcome this initiative that aims also to contribute, as you mentioned, Ariela, to building bridges of understanding inside both communities due to their inner differentiation and even fragmentations, and among them. This last dimension is a serious reminder our sciences, social sciences, the humanities, have a great role to play today in times when reason and peace seem an achievable goal. So bringing together these scholars from these groups really is highly enthusiastic and stimulating for our communities. And this emphasis on the intersection between ethno-religious belief, belonging, and our worldviews, as our commentator will later let us know, the world with us in it, offers and opens an horizon that carries a message of commitment to science, to humanity, to our social being. So I wish you a very successful session and looking forward for more initiative like this. Thank you.
Thank you. So Gerardo, please.
Thank you for such an eloquent statement, Judith. Thank you. I also welcome this collaboration as we as scholars are needed so much to have our conversations with each other and to support each other, to be able to get clarity, to actually be able to be on the ground, to be able to have critical perspective that is clear and compelling, one that will help not only ourselves, but also our students and our communities. I believe also that we need to be able to create spaces like this, not only ones that will serve those who are specialists and experts who thrive on being able to think and work together and collaborate together, but also ones that are open enough that those who are seeking to understand, those who understand that they don't really have a handle on things and need input from others, are willing to enter into an interdisciplinary space in order to be able to hear from others. And this is what I appreciate so much about what has been created here. I'm very grateful for my colleagues, especially Ariella and Jocelyn, who have put this together and organized during what is a busy time for all of us. And I wish that we would all be able to make sure that we create room to support each other in this way. We know that our institutions in many ways are weak and inadequate for being able to support work that is often misunderstood and which is often neglected. And so we need these kinds of things for us to be able to thrive together. So thank you so much for the work. I welcome this community and I look forward to what we can accomplish together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're starting and we're going to go by the order that of participants that you received in your invitations. We're going to start with my colleague, Jocelyn Cesari from Georgetown University. Jocelyn was instrumental in putting together this webinar. So please, Jocelyn, the screen is yours.
Yes, unmute.
The administrator should be able to unmute Jocelyn.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So let me now. I was saying that I am very happy to be part as a participant to this panel, and also how happy I am to see that this virtual programming is now from the SSSR is now in its third installment, and thanks to the effort of Ariella and all the other members of the Executive Council. So without further ado, I am the I am the minority here for once, because I'm going to present the question of modesty and lived Islam across different contexts. So I show you this. Can you see this poster? Hear me and see the posters. Can someone acknowledge?
Yes, we can put it on the screen.
Okay, so why am I showing you this particular poster? Because if you think today of Muslim women and modesty, the landscape, the mental landscape is pretty much shaped by the idea of women clad in black clothes and not visible. And that is not the, I would say, orthodox understanding of modesty for women. And it is not even the reality of Muslim across different Muslim majority countries, and even more so in minority context. If you take Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Iran, and even Iran, we can discuss the reality of this mental representation. Besides these three countries, the way that women understand modesty and implement it in their daily life is far, far away from this mental or imaginary vision of the Muslim woman. Why I'm also showing you that is because, unfortunately, lots of the scholarship in Islamic studies has implicitly or explicitly dealt with this representation to show that women have agency, and looking at text and interpreting text. It's been a big part of today what is the question of gender in Islamic studies, a sort of hermeneutic of the text, especially if the scholar is a Muslim woman herself. And second, there have been another trend, which is to look at the way that women operate as agent at their own piety or normative understanding of their religion, and this is more anthropological. But at the end of the day, both are implicitly fighting with this misrepresentation. What I want you to discuss today is more what's called Live Islam, where and this is based on 15 years of research now in different Muslim majority contexts and even beyond, where I show that the modernized form of Islam are linked not as much as written here to the post-colonial state, but to the rise of national culture in which Islam is part of it. In other words, the role of theology is important, not to negate it at all, but it is very much shaped by the expectations, the cultural norm of what is the right woman as a citizen in the national context. And here I give the references where you can go and look at the data. I have probably just a more couple minutes to leave to tell you more about that. So what we see emerging in the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of the nation state is a strong proactive state action on women's rights. And this is because, unlike what also the vision of the secular state not mingling into religion, across Muslim majority countries, even the most secular state have controlled, regulated, changed deeply the clerics and the Sharia in a way that is, I think, unprecedented even before the Muslim nation. So it means that everywhere, the outlier here being only Turkey, everywhere the state has taken on the legislation of women's body, how they marry, how they have children, how they divorce, if they can get custody of their children. The family law everywhere is not secular. It is run by Sharia court, something that we find also, of course, in Israel. What is interesting is that this has been going on for more than 4 generations. And so every religious discussion on modesty in each of these countries is shaped by the expectations that have been put up by the state. And again, not as policy, but much more as Norbert Elias would say, as habitus. What everybody expects women to be or to behave, not only in the house, but also outside. As a worker, as a citizen, as a political actor. It means that I introduce here a distinction that I found very helpful. If you look at the rights of women, the individual rights are the ones that I have highlighted in blue: education, health right, political right, work. These have advanced significantly in all of Muslim countries. Again, here, Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia being the outliers. Even in Iran, women outnumber men in universities. They are a majority of the new professional bodies. They are more educated than men. This is individual rights. And there is nothing in the Islamic tradition that prevents that. To a point that a few years before the Arab Spring, the University of Al-Azhar issued a Bill of Rights of Women to remind the citizens of Egypt who go to the Gulf and come back with the idea that the doxa, the right way to be a good Muslim woman is to completely clad yourself and segregate yourself at home. The University of Al-Azhar issued a Bill of Rights reminding Egyptians that women have the right to education, the right to work, the right to be active politically. What is still at stake is a more intimate sphere, what I call the rights of the self, meaning women are dealing with religious prescription when it comes to marriage, divorce, custody of children, and law of inheritance. And here you can see again that these laws are not applied everywhere the same way. The state has, under push of secular organization, but also religious organization, try to maintain a balance between, you know, the law of modesty in the family, and especially the sexual law, and the expectation of being part of this modern nation. Everywhere, the question, which is similar to the Jewish law of the talaq, the man exerts the monopoly of initiating the divorce. This has been mitigated in a lot of Muslim countries by taking into account the wife agency in different circumstances. Most of them are already present actually in the Sharia in the traditional sense, but it gives you the idea when you look at really what it means to be modest, what it means to live in this particular context, to see that the push is not between religious and secular, like we tend to see it, but between more or less traditionalist understanding of the law, knowing that even the secular are attached to this law. The only aspect that is so vibrant in the Western imaginary, which is the hijab, that's why I also started with this poster. The hijab is not regulated, except again in Iran and in Saudi Arabia, and it's left pretty much at the understanding of women of their own rule of modesty. Having said that, the patriarchal expectation, the traditional expectation is that a good woman tends to be modest. Does this mean that she covers entirely? Does it mean that she wears modest clothes? The scope is infinite. You have very pretty young lady wearing a scarf with makeup and jeans, and nothing is regulated about that or regulated about that. So, and you have others that refuse makeup and that never wear jeans. So again, this is something that is left more or less, again, what is expected in the country. From Tunisia to Pakistan, the differences are not in the Sharia. The differences are in the expectation about gender that has been shaped by what I call this national Islam. So having said that, I want to show you, I wanted to give you more about education, for example. Also, what we don't take into account is that the very educated urban women in most of Muslim countries are highly educated, sometimes more than the average woman in some Western countries. And that is not a dispute among shuyukh or ulema. Political rights, they do exist. What we also tend to neglect is that the men don't have political rights either. So it's not that the women are sometimes disadvantaged, it's that political rights in some of these countries are not granted. But what we see is indeed a tendency of patriarchal culture to push or try to put the women out of this public space. I don't have time, but I wanted to show you some of this political empowerment, looking at Egypt, Turkey, Morocco, but also France and India. And you see there are discrepancies, but they are not, you know, completely, the level of Muslim women participation is not close to zero, unlike what also people think. This is economic empowerment. And I don't have time to say more, but in sum, What is clear is that, again, unless you take Saudi Arabia as the doxa, which is religiously, sociologically, and empirically wrong, even if the Saudis tend to present themselves this way, women's rights, if you think of the lapse of time, since the decolonization, it has been 50 years. The right of women in Muslim countries have gone more quickly than the right of women in some Western countries. Again, when did French women got the right to vote? 1945. When did most of Muslim women got the right to vote? After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the 1920s, some even before the American one. So there is really no religiously grounded objection to that. What the objection is the family, because the woman, the wife, is seen as the pillar of the family life. But again, if I look across different contexts, there is much more leverage and capacity for or room for discussion than we think there is, and it varies across countries. That's what I call the state-gendered politics. So to close up, modesty here, it cannot be limited to the dress code. There are women who don't wear the hijab and that are much more modest in their relationship to the other gender than women who wear the hijab, because the hijab can be a political sign due to the political context I mentioned before, authoritarian regime and so on. And it can also be seen by young women as a passport for more freedom, including in their sexual relation, because there is the assumption that if I wear the hijab, I am, I would say, conform to orthodoxy, which is not always the case. So what is at stake here is really what do women can do in the public space in terms of modesty rule. And that's where you can see that it is not regulated by the states as much than it is by the urban culture or rural culture in which these women operate. And I will finish here by saying that we tend to associate religion and secular culture with individualization. Through the different surveys I have done, it is clear that there is a religious individualization as well. Lots of very educated women coming from very secular background, embracing more stricter rules of modesty and gender relation, not because they are imposed on them by their father, brothers, or husband, but because they consider that this is the right way to live in the religious community that they take then central over the national cultural community. And I stop here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And now we're turning to Valentina Gadi from the University of Montreal. So please, Valentina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Ariela. Thank you for everybody being here today. Thank you for organizing this. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. So I would like to start by the poster of these movies. As most of you most likely have witnessed, there is a great deal of interest toward Orthodox Jewish women in the past 4 years. And these are just but 3 examples of movies or TV series that have been showcasted on Netflix or in the movies, for example, as per Félix Séméra in Quebec, since 2016, and Unorthodox is 2020, My Unorthodox Life 2021. So these representation are most likely, they show a portrait of what the literature, the scholar literature called exiters, and in particular women exiters, so women that decide to start a process to leave their community, their Orthodox or Hasidic community. So in my presentation, I will use Orthodox and Hasidic as a synonymous, but we know that it's not exactly the same. Jewish Orthodoxy is a broader category that include Hasidic people, and Hasidic people are people that go through the tradition of the Hasidut that comes from Eastern Europe. So this representation on the screen portrayed women that reject their way of life, how they grew up, and in order to look for a new one in what Hasidic people call the outside world. In contrast with this image, what I did in the past, I would say 6 years during my PhD, is to follow the everyday life of about 20 Hasidic women in Montreal from different communities, and which are, for who knows, so Hasidut is divided in communities, they follow slightly different tradition. So I follow women from different communities and from different ages. What I wanted to also underline is, in contrast to Jocelyn's work, I'm really focusing on a community which in Montreal, it's located in a specific neighborhood, like actually on the border between two neighbors, the borough of Outremont and the borough of the Plateau Mont-Royal. And it's a very small community, and it's a visible community, meaning that they live among other people. In the Outremont neighborhood, most likely French, Canadian, Quebecois, middle class, and in the Plateau, which is really one is on the border with the other. It's like a hipster neighborhood, more artsy. It's also middle class, young professional. And so they kind of stick up, and they form a minority. They are about, in the Outremont neighborhood, they are about the 20% of the population. In the Plateau Mont-Royal, they are about the 7% of the population. But still, the number are low. They are about 8,000 people. So it's really a small community. So what I did, I spent time with about 20 women, and I went to have coffee with them at the local store. I baked chalot. I baked the bread for Shabbat with them. We went for shopping. We did all kind of everyday activities. And what I was interested into was in the way these women inhabit the norm, to quote Saba Mahmoud. So it's not, I'm not interested in people living, rejecting, or openly subverting the norm, but how they fit in, to use the word, in the norm. So my research used gender as an analytical tool, and what I ask, my research question, we can say, is how Hasidic women do gender, and in particular femininity, in their everyday life. I see gender both as a structure of power, following Jean Scott, and as something that we do, a performative act, which is always relational. So I adopt a feminist and sociological view of gender. So I define, in the end, gender, and in particularly femininity, as a way of relating to others and to the world that pass through the body. And for me, and it's something that is the thesis that I'm trying to defend, the way these women do gender is overlap with the way these women do Jewishness. So of course, for the people who know the Orthodox community and Jewish law, what came out pretty fast is that tzniut, so modesty, which is roughly translated as modesty, but a lot of women do not agree with that. But we can stick with this translation for now. So tzniut, or tznius in the Yiddish pronunciation that these women use, came up as a central concept that orient the way the women I met do gender, do their femininity, and in the end, do their Jewishness. So tzniut describes both a character trait of modesty and discretion, so a character that people, both men and women, can have, but also a group of Jewish law pertaining to conduct, or how women and men should behave. So in Jewish law, modesty apply both to men and women, but in the past, since 1970, so in the past 50 years, we've seen a growing body of literature on women modesty. So it's really, there is a focus on modesty, and modesty became a mitzvah, a commandment that it's mostly related to women. And I put on the screen the book that is considered the Tzniut handbook, Oz Ve'adar Levusha, from Rabbi Eliyahu Falk. And just to give you an example, the detail, the kaleidoscopic attention to the details that is given in describing how a woman should dress, and it really goes into the length of the skirt, the kind of a dress, of a t-shirt, of the length of the sleeves that a woman can wear, the kind of makeup that could be wear. So it's really, and I put especially the page related to the nail polish because I wanted to focus on these particular details, because usually we focus on the length of the skirt, is something that is motivated, or head covering. And in the same vein of Jocelyn, what I would like to point out is that modesty for the women I was working with, it really lays it comes up in very small details, as is the color of the nail polish. So what do they say? I'm just going to give you two ethnographic vignettes. One woman that I met, Malki, I met in 2020, and when I met her, she was wearing a pink nail polish. After a couple of months, I met her again in a beauty salon where I was conducting my fieldwork in the neighborhood, and she was having a French manicure. So for those who doesn't know, the French manicure is a pinkish on the nail, and there is a little white line. So we're really talking about small detail. We're talking about going from pink to French manicure. And then 3 years later, as we're walking in the neighborhood, she's telling me, you know, I'm not going to wear pink nail polish anymore. I'm just going to wear nude and just having like a clean buffered manicure with a nude nail polish. For me, it's enough, because I feel that I am more content in my life and I don't need to put something in my nails. I don't need to go there. It's not a struggle I have anymore. And also, I was kind of bothered by the fact that my kids' friends used to comment on my nail polish. So now I decided I'm going to stop with that. Another example is the example of Esther, another woman. So a thing that I didn't mention is Malki, she's in her late 20s, and Esther as well, she's in her late 20s. And this is an important aspect. So when I met Hester in 2022 in her house, she was wearing a very delicate nail polish, as well, almost nude. And she tells me that usually she dares to put something more, white, opaque, pink. Again, so we remain in a little change of shadow. But she actually chose that color because her sister-in-law was coming from Israel for Shabbat. And I quote her, and then I know she will go to New York and tell everything she saw here. So she decided to go with something very, very understated. So I decided, she told me, I just don't want her to go and tell everybody what she saw here. It's not a big deal. I respect who they are and go for a more subtle nail polish. But next time I will go with another one. And during the same conversation, I tell her that I love red polish, and that because of I'm living myself in the neighborhood, so I study the word I live in, and I teach in a Hasidic school. I hang out a lot with Hasidic women. I stopped putting red nail polish, and she tells me, "Oh, I love red nail polish, but in the same time, I wish I would stay where I am." So what this nail polish is telling us? So first, it confirmed that the way these women do gender is intertwined, or actually superposed, in the way they do Jewishness. The way they take care of their body it comes in a framework of the Jewish law. And as another woman tell me, a woman thing is to be modest, or rather, I will rephrase it, what a Jewish woman thing is to be modest. And at the same time, these women share with me their struggle, but how they try to fit in, both in a system of norms and in a community that is represented by the fact that the little kid is staring at the nails of Malki, or that the sister-in-law is going to New York and gossiping about the nails, Esther nails. So one point that I wanted to make is that Tzniut does not function in a vacuum, but it functions in a Torah-oriented system where other concepts constantly come out, and these women bring out this concept in order to make sense of why they try to follow this rule in a way that is comfortable with them. So one example is the concept of yichud, the idea of seclusion. So there is a great body of law that regulate how two persons of the opposite sex, of course in a Jewish law, can or cannot be in the same space. The laws are complex and I won't go into detail now. We can if you want, but to just give you an example, Malki, again, she tells me that when she's at home, she's by herself, but there is a worker and she needs to go out for a wedding, for example. She wants to wear high heels. She's not going to wear them in the house because she already thinks that wearing high heels is not always modest, but she doesn't do it in the house. She waits when she goes outside, because she's sharing a space with a person of the opposite sex, no matter if it's Jewish or not Jewish. Another concept is the idea that is brought up is the idea of Yetzer Hara. So Esther, she justified the fact that she wants to wear, for example, a shorter skirt. So we go to on another aspect of modesty, is the fact that she gives up to her evil inclination, and so she decided that for her it's okay to do that. She knows she shouldn't, but she wear a short. Sometimes she wears skirts that are shorter than what she is supposed to, according to the community norms and the Tzniut norms in Jewish law in general. So the last one is the idea of Ilul Neshama, is another woman, Elizabeth, which is in her 60s, and she's telling me that at one point, a couple of months ago, she decided to do something for the neshama, the soul of her mother. So the idea of Ilul Neshama in Jewish law is that if we do something for the deceased people, if we do an act of kindness for a person who's dead, this act of kindness is even greater. So she decided to take upon herself, that's the word she used, to be more modest, and specifically to wear slipper when she is in her house by herself. So to do something just for herself to honor her mother's soul. So Tzniut function in a system, but it's not static. It is a sensibility that change according to time and space, and we already started to see it because, for example, an important element that shift how women conceive Tzniut is their age. Already Malki told us the fact that now she's more content, and this is related to the fact that now she has 3 kids, she's married, she has 3 kids, so she grew up, she feels comfortable in her community. She feels that she can kind of give up on the nail color, and she can continue, she can not have just have a very subtle manicure. Elizabeth, which is in her 60s, also have a different conception of Tzniut, which is, she said in the quote that I wrote, she said, it's for me, Tzniut is in the details. It's not in the matter of how long my skirt is. So she's taking up something on like a mitzvah that is not related even of going out of the house, but it's in the house when nobody's seeing her. She's doing something for herself. Another element that changed Tzniut, or the way women think about Tzniut, is the spatial dimension. So the situation is always evaluated. Something that is not Tzniut in one situation can be in another one. For example, biking is not considered modest for Hasidic women. And what do they do? And what I've done with them is to go outside of the neighborhood and to go to the old ports close to the water, or to go to other park just maybe 15 minutes from here, and we bike. So they do that. The same thing is coming in the neighborhood. There's this Chabad woman that lives in another neighborhood, and she's a taxi driver, which usually it's very male. Driving is considered a male thing in most Hasidic community. And so she drives, and she said, when I come into the neighborhood, I realized that why driving is not modest, because when I am driving, I wanted to read you the quote. If you come to a stop sign and there is a car pulling up exactly at the same time, if you are modest, you don't look at the other driver because you're not supposed to look the other person in the person of the other sex in the eyes. But if you are, so it wasn't until, but as she is driving, she has to look other people and also other men driving. So she realized that it's not so tzniut to be driving, and maybe that's why a lot of women in this neighborhood do not drive. So I'm going to conclude joining a bigger debate in the feminist conversation, I would say, that is related to agency. So what this very small detail regarding nail polish, but also other bigger details regarding the length of the skirt, or is driving or biking, what it says about the formation of the self and this women agency. So I think that to observe the details through which Hasidic women do tzniut in their everyday life allow us to join more broad feminist conversation about agency, and in particularly allow us to frame agency outside the liberal paradigm as something other than resistant to or freedom for. So I use the concept of the obligated self that is formulated by Mara Benjamin, and she's building up on the work of Jonathan Schofer on chosen subjection. So there is this idea that the Jewish self, but Jonathan Schofer it's very interesting in a comparative way because it opens up to other tradition, other religious tradition. But what Marla Benjamin said is that the Jewish self is an obligated self, and this obligation that Jewish people have is gendered. So Mara Benjamin said that this is because women becomes mother, and this is what make them obligated. That is different in the way Jewish men live their obligation through God. But I would like to expand that this obligation goes behind the fact of being mothers. It's always in relation to other, but it's also related to the way these women conceive their body, and it's always in a way that there is an awareness through our own body according to who is in front of us. So first of all, these women acknowledge the legitimacy of the system, both the halakha, the Jewish law, and the community that are around them, because it's always these two dimensions that intertwine to define what's allowed and what's not, and try to find their place, to fit in, again, to quote them, in this system, to knowing that is a balance that require constant awareness, a constant movement between who they are and who they aspire to be. And it implies acceptance, awareness, and a work on the self, and also most of the time a struggle. So I will just like to finish by quoting a few sentences that for me, that struck me the most, and is the one that I already quoted about Esther and their struggle with nail polish, because it expressed the ambivalence and the struggle behind the fact of accepting this obligation that we have through the Jewish law and the Jewish people, and how it is gendered. So she said, if you remember, she told me regarding wearing nail polish that she loved, and she said it with a lot of enthusiasm. I love red nail polish. I would love to wear it, but at the same time, I wish I stay where I am. So we can see the tension and the struggle. So this idea of obligated self, and I end of this quote, is well expressed in the word of Esther, that she tells me, Yiddishkeit, so being a religious Jew, is not about what I want. It's not a feel good. It's not about what I feel. It's about what I need to do. I don't feel like praying this morning is not an option. I feel it's a duty that I need to do. That's what we believe our life is. We were put in this world, we were born in order to improve ourselves, to do God's will, and God's will is not necessarily in line with what I particularly want today. I think the highest level you could reach is to say, I really don't want to do this, but I'm going to, because that's what I'm supposed to do. So to conclude, some say the devil is in the details. For others, it is God who is there. Rather, Malki, Esther, Elizabeth, and the other women I met teach me that there in the details, we can find traces of their individuation, certainly modest and even consciously limited, but at the same time assumed. Thank you very much.
So now we're turning to Ilana Spencer from the University of Pittsburgh. And my request to the participants, just to keep your presentation short, because otherwise other people will not have a chance to talk. So please, Ilana.
Hello. My name is Alana Spencer. I am a PhD student at the University of Sociology. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. I want to share first a little bit about myself before I get into my research. Although we'll probably get into this more in the discussion. But I attended a Haredi girls' high school and was immersed in this world for most of my life. I then went on to become a teacher and an administrator in Haredi girls' schools. And throughout this time, I noticed in those positions a cultural shift within the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which I will refer to as the Haredi Jewish community from now on. You could see on the image on the left a representation of how women's faces are beginning to be erased from media. Sometimes the bodies are shown, sometimes no picture or representation of women is shown. In the middle, you will see a Haredi woman influencer named Alexandra Fletcher, who has taken on some of the cultural symbolism of the American right wing. On the far right, you'll see some of the punitive measures that the community takes regarding, political support for any political representation that's deemed as left within the Orthodox world. So to me, this crystallized with the election of Trump, although I believe it was latent beforehand. And, for some people it was more shocking. For some people it felt more natural. For me, it felt really shocking. I was somebody who came to the Orthodox community on my own as a very young girl, searching for something, that was, I believe, developmentally appropriate for the community and the morality. And, later on, I saw that these latent trends, which really stuck with me very deeply. So when I started in my PhD program, I wanted to study the doing of gender, much like Valentina discussed, because I had this unique access and insight into all girls spaces and educational spaces. And as I was doing that, I realized that there was no way to study the doing of gender in these schools without studying the doing of race and racialization. Racialization typically refers to when communities or people or individuals become more racialized in the sense that they become more colored or more white or more, colored in quotes, or more ethnicized. In the case of the Jewish community and some other communities, Jews of European descent have over the past, 50 plus years become more white. So that's not typically the way racialization is used. I refer to it as whitening in my work. So as I was exploring the doing of gender and eventually the doing of race, I decided to pursue a textual analysis rooted in, feminist theories that look at standpoint. as an epistemic understanding. And in the tradition of Dorothy Smith, an institutional ethnography, which I'll talk more about soon. But I wanted to say also, my work is situated within a larger discussion, a newer discussion, I should also add, on how Haredim fit within the American political and racial landscape. There's new work that's beginning to be published about this, but you might think of Stolzenberg and Meyer's American Shtetl for understanding how Haredi communities fit in with discussions of religious liberty in the United States. There's a rich history that historians are working on now to understand how political alignment within the Haredi community is rooted within less so Israel, as you might think, but more housing concerns and political advocacy that has been, changing over time since the Jewish community has been politically active in the US for quite some time. But it originated in the 80s in the Reagan era, and has extended now in terms of the Haredi community in regarding religious liberty alignments with the right. So very briefly, you'll see here an image that was published in a Haredi magazine that I found really interesting. Everybody found very shocking when it came out. They had to issue an apology about weight loss and supplements that were advertised to girls in shidduchim, or young women in the marriage market. It seemed to be saying the quiet part aloud for a lot of people that made them very uncomfortable about norms for girls' bodies and how they need to fit in with a certain image of femininity, which I argue is racialized. I think my contribution generally is how modesty, like many things, is deeply gendered, deeply raced, and I think it fits in very specifically with political projects and political identities. So what I used for this study was different textual artifacts and different historical monographs. These are the main ones. In the middle is a representation of, it was difficult sometimes to get a hold of handbooks. I wasn't able to represent every single Haredi community, but I found some that were a little more obscure. Some were not in English. Others were very publicly available, but I found rich data in all of them. I compared them to a text on the left by Dr. James Dobson, who I don't know if you might be familiar with this or not, but he is a evangelical Christian. Focus on the family is his institution, and very interested in traditional gender roles. So he wrote this manual on how to raise girls according to his view. Fearing the Black Body is where I got much of my understanding of the historical differentiation between Black and white bodies and where Jewish bodies may fit into that. So real quickly, since I only have a few minutes left, I want to go over some of my findings, some of the evidence, with the understanding that, my long tenure in the community and as an administrator and enforcer of these rules is deeply informing, to the point almost of autoethnography, my interpretation of this work. So I want to make very explicit that my positionality is very much part of this, and my care about the community. I know that many other works talk about subjectivity and agency, and I see these structural components as fitting in rather than antagonistic against those other perspectives. A big one is thinness. On the left, you'll see, mostly in Yiddish, a description of the tights that Bell's girls are required to wear. every single one of them is control top. So women's bodies, in this case, girls' bodies, the ruling regulations from the institutions, to me, very much are reflected from the evangelical Christian white femininity as understood by Sabrina Strings. Another one is the influence of purity culture in the Jewish community. In the handbooks, it's very veiled, but the language is quite explicit to me about protecting the students' minds, protecting their, their souls, and the outside influences as a corruptive force, which I think is also reflected in the strategies of rule from the evangelical Christian ruling class in the US, and how that, and the political implications of that. You'll see here also how only boys are allowed to ride their bikes to yeshiva in one of the handbooks. Another one is respectability, which is a very politically loaded idea originating with Du Bois. And it's very present in dialogues and texts that position political subjects as racialized and fitting in with dominant cultural norms. I contrasted some of the descriptions in one of the handbooks about hair with the provocative culture described in Dobson's work, because of experiences I and my friends have had with hair being a deeply racialized discourse, which didn't show up explicitly in the handbooks, but I understood as very much the subtext of monitoring hair. The last one was royalty. Royalty discourse shows up a lot in evangelical Christian discourse, and it has begun to show up in Jewish imagery as well. I have some examples here. The handbooks were replete with it. This one is interesting because the boys also, in both Christian cultures and Jewish cultures, are called upon to be a prince. But with girls, the discourse is even more emphasized, the bas melech, or the daughter of a king discourse, as a way to coordinate women's bodies in relation to their environment and further create political subjects in this regard. So that's some of the, there's so much I could show you. I thought I would share some of the highlights. And I'm hoping that my work opens up a discussion, contributes to a broader discussion about the specificities of the Haredi community within the American political world, but also in this space that's, this joint conversation from people of different disciplines and locations. I think that this opens up a really interesting opportunity to think about embodiment and modesty and race are all intertwined with gender and modesty in ways that open up some modes of discovery and dawning of new aspects for how those all are mutually constitutive. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilana. And we have two more speakers, so we want to make sure that we leave enough time for our discussion. So please, now we'll hear from Adina Mankier-Karp from actually Jerusalem, but also from the Australian University. Please, Adina.
My apologies, I was on mute. I'll start that again. Ariella, thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this, and to the rest of the presenters for your incredible insights. I hope to contribute by sharing mine. This is a study that I've been involved in for just a few weeks, a very interesting study, and I'll explain that very briefly. You'll be familiar with some of the conceptual frameworks that have been used to understand women's head covering, and I'm focusing on Israeli women. At least Israeli in the sense that they received most of their socialization here. They may not have been born here, but they came as children. And I decided, for the purpose of this research project, not to focus on conceptual frameworks, but to really focus far more on epistemology. I wanted to understand whether my positioning as an Orthodox head covering female was going to shape the way I asked the questions, the way they reacted to me in the experience of the interviews that I conducted with them, and also in the kind of analysis that I was able to develop as a consequence. I really wanted to see whether my positionality as an insider, or what I imagined to be an insider, was going to have a tremendous effect, or any kind of different effect, whether I was going to be able to come up with any insights that were novel, given the research that had been done before by other people. What I'd like to have a look at is just looking there in the centre at the three questions that I asked them. It was very semi-structured. The first one, please tell me a little bit about yourself. The second, who were the influential people on the journey to who you are today? And the third one, people may offer different reasons for head covering. What is the why of head covering for you? And I'm going to focus in today's presentation just on this final question. What I found, which was quite powerful, was that there were some who spoke about, I cover my hair because I do this for myself. This is part of my character refinement. There were others who said, I need to cover my hair because this is about my relationship with God. Others said, I do this so that I share head covering with my spouse. I keep my hair for him, and this is something we have that's special together. Others said, I do this for my home, and I'll elaborate on what that means in a moment. Others said they did it to connect with their ancestors. Others still spoke about head covering as connecting them to their communities, their religious communities. And we had people who said that they did it in order to contribute to the Jewish people. And a larger group even still saying that they covered their hair and they understood head covering to them to be meaningful because it connected them to Jewish people throughout time. Now, the people that I interviewed were Israeli, and they came from across the head covering or Orthodox spectrum. There were women who were born in, or at least had parents who were born in Yemen, Iran, Morocco. There were people whose parents were born in the United States and they came as very, very small children, and those families had more Polish, Hungarian, or Ashkenazi backgrounds. So the people that I interviewed were really quite diverse across the ethnic spectrum, and I'll have a look at some of their perspectives here. Incidentally, just looking at that earlier visual, this does not mean that they overlapped or that one is larger than the other, but these were the range of different insights that came across from the interviews. For those who said that they did it for themselves, it was about attaining a different kind of modesty. It was about making their lives less materialistic and more spiritual. One woman said, over the years, I've altered my dress slightly. From my viewpoint, head covering is part of modesty. They're not distinct, they are one. And as I read more, I understand that more. Head covering shouldn't attract the eye. My aim is to dress well, but not to be eye-catching. A second woman said that for her, it wasn't that head covering was not modesty at all. It was what God wanted her to do. She didn't think that uncovered hair was immodest. She saw it simply as something to do as a head covering or as a person. She did this for God and with God. A third thing that came out was the idea of doing it for one's spouse. And this woman was quite candid about her relationship with head covering, saying that I totally agree that a hairstyle makes a massive impression as an important part of a woman's beauty. And precisely because of this, I believe in the importance of head covering to keep my beauty for my husband. She was actually a very attractive woman, so it was quite a striking confession or admission from her. One of the fourth theme that came out, or the fourth meaning making that was bound up in the idea of head covering, was about the home. there were women who said, by covering my hair and the way I do it, I send a message to my children about who we are as a family. It's not always clear from where we live, their schools, where we pray. My head covering clarifies that for them. So it almost branded the family in a way that was quite visceral for the children in the family. A fifth theme came out, which was quite powerful, and this was from a woman from Yemen, a woman whose parents were born in Yemen. And she said that when she looks in the mirror, she sees her ancestors, and that for her, head covering is a way of connecting with her grandmothers and great-grandmothers, which I thought was quite powerful. A sixth theme came across in community, but there wasn't any reflection on the idea of head covering as conformity. It was more about saying, I accept you as a community, and you accept me as a community, and the way I cover my hair reflects that relationship. This was from a woman who identifies as a religious feminist, and she said there, I want to be associated. I want them to look at me and say, oh, she's like that. Even though she sounds very feminist and can sound very left-wing, she's from the religious community. So she actually did that to say to herself that my religious sentiments are more dominant than my feminist sentiments, but she also did that to show that and project that message to her community. Next theme that came across was the idea of doing it for her community. So this is a woman who I interviewed a few weeks after, well, semi-recently, but of course during a time of conflict in Israel. And she said, which is quite powerful, I hope the Jewish people will repent. The correct path will save us from so many problematic philosophies, feminism, progressiveness, which are ruining us and the world. It's clear to me that living according to Jewish law safeguards our families. I am more careful now for our people, for our merit. For those who are not familiar, there is an idea that one can actually perform religious commandments on behalf of others and almost donate the accrued merit to someone else or for someone else's behalf. And what she's suggesting here was that by being stricter with her covering her hair, she was giving merit to the Jewish people at this particular time in history. The final theme that came across was the idea of connecting to people throughout time. And the woman who spoke about this idea connected to several biblical figures and one rabbinic figure. And the rabbinic figure that she spoke about explicitly was the wife of a man called Kimchit, whose walls of her home did not see her hair, and she merited that 10 of her sons became the high priest. And she said, my husband is the priest, a Kohen. Perhaps this spoke to me. I feel the connection to the text more strongly. So just as a reflection on these 8 themes that came out in the semi-structured, very long-form interviews that I conducted, there was an idea really here that reflecting on head covering for these women was a catalyst of religious meaning-making. And that wasn't really something that I saw in the literature that I read after the interviews. For anyone who has captured that in their readings, I'd be very, very grateful to have those sorts of references. There were also ideas of insider and outsider challenges. As an insider, I found it fascinating that they trusted me completely, but because of that, they kept saying, oh, you know what I'm talking about. They didn't feel that it was absolutely necessary to share their views because they assumed that as an insider, I was someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. And I really had to coax them to put in words their feelings rather than them waving away with very, very laconic sentences. Still, the challenges were there. As an outsider, there were ethnic notions of spirituality and head covering that, with my background that's more European, my grandparents were born in Europe, that either I didn't understand or they assumed that I wouldn't understand. And there was a lot more active listening and communication that was necessary to understand Moroccan, Iranian, and Persian and Yemenite notions of spirituality, which was a very humbling experience for someone who assumed she'd be an insider and discovered she wasn't. In terms of theoretical and methodological contributions, sometimes when we do research, we paint a target and then we measure through the research our ability and our success to hit that target with the research that we do. In other research, which is more phenomenological, we start with shooting an arrow and then afterwards we paint a target around it. And I think in this case, not doing too much reading and leaving the women open without any direct and very specific questions, leaving them open to tell me what was important to them, I found was a very important methodological contribution. And I think whether it's the study of Israeli women's head covering or any other sphere and population within the fields of the sociology of religion, sometimes starting with putting power and putting the microphone in the hands of our subjects can be quite valid and very, very rich in the findings that come out. And I think just a final comment that's bound up in the final 3 dot points that I have on this slide. I was a little not put off, but quite surprised by some of the language that I saw in some of the research, some of the published research associated with women's head covering. And I saw the word fundamentalist and looked it up and thought about it quite carefully. And although officially it's a neutral term, in most common parlance, it's actually quite a negative term. It has very, very negative connotations about the sanity, the sincerity, and the normity of the people who are actually being given this title. And I guess my conclusion from that is that perhaps instead of labeling them fundamentalist, we can find more neutral terms when we do research on these populations. And the final one, in terms of, is it possible for a feminist to do this sort of research? I turn to Hamlet, I turn to Shakespeare, who says there is nothing, either good or bad, but thinking that makes it so. So if we're able to put ourselves in our pockets before we conduct research on populations that are fundamentally different to us, or perhaps different to what we imagine, then I think that we have the opportunity to learn tremendously rich things and connect with people in profound ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adina. The floor is now to Sauson Kier from University of Haifa and the Aalto Academy in Finland. And Sauson, you have a really challenge here because you really have to make sure that we leave time for our discussant. So I ask you to really be brief and perhaps those who want to stay afterwards will be able to stay. So please, Sauson, the screen is yours.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. First of all, thank you all for joining. And second, thank you, Ariela, for this valuable opportunity to present my research. So my presentation today will be basing on data that I collected as part of my doctoral dissertation that was conducted as part of the Young Adults and Religion in a Global Perspective, or the YARG research project by the Aalto Academy University in Finland. That was conducted in 13 countries worldwide. Now, my dissertation actually focuses on the religious, secular, and/or spiritual worldviews of young adult Druze and Muslim students, university students in Israel. And for the aims of this current presentation, I will be focusing, of course, on female Muslim students. The data of the research was collected in 2 stages. In the first stage, we collected surveys. In the second stage, we conducted interviews. And out of the 22 interviews that I conducted with Muslim students, I conducted 14 interviews with young adult female students. Well, in terms of the sample, 4 of these students were wearing the hijab, and 1 was wearing the full religious dress, the jilbab, which is something like this, full religious dress, and the other 4 were actually wearing pants and shirts and the hijab. Now, when I started analyzing the data, I wasn't looking for any categories or any kind of categorizations, but then I noticed that there were many similarities in terms of the issues that were raised by the female students. Thus, I called these manifestations of religiosity. Of course, these are not clear-cut categories, and these are only general trends, not representative, of female students generally in Israel, Muslim female students, but only should be regarded as manifestations. To start with, I call the first manifestation of religiosity as conservation as liberation, and in this category, I would say all the interviewees were the religious students. Now, importantly, it's not that I looked at the interviews or approached the interviews of the religious students and said, okay, let's find similarities. Contrarily, I just went to the interviews, and all of a sudden I realized that all of the religious ones raised the same issues and points. So these students basically indicated, all of them, values of universalism, the acceptance of others, the freedom of religion and religious choice. For them, religion was a liberal choice, and by that I mean is that they chose to be religious in terms of dressing or covering their heads. And one of these interviewees, for instance, indicated that her mother strongly rejected the fact that she wanted to cover her head. The level of objection was high, she said. I thought they would support me, but then she said, let me do what I want. Another interviewee indicated that clearly this is my own personal choice, and I'm coming from a non-religious environment. Thus, instead of thinking of the stereotypical view many times that people see when they see a religious woman wearing the hijab, that this is following some tradition or conviction, but it's not in their case. Some of them coming from like non-religious families. So this is one important finding. Furthermore, for them, all of them, in all their interviews, they indicated that wearing the hijab, although they are wearing the hijab by themselves, does not imply being religious, or does not mean that the person is deeply religious. One of them said, it's not that every girl who wears the hijab, she's religious, and it's not that every girl who's not wearing the hijab is not religious. Dress has nothing to do with the level of religiosity. For them, religiosity is not even about practice, because one of the interviewees, for instance, mentioned going to the that some people go to the mosque every Friday, but then in her opinion, this does not mean that their prayers are more accepted than someone who is not or less religious and does not go to on Fridays to the mosque and prays at home. Also, they indicated that morality comes first before religion, and that religion is actually about doing morality. For instance, one of them said religion is about principles before being prayer. Religion is about values, about how to treat each other, about cooperating with people, and mutual or kind treatment to each other. And of course, for them, religiosity is something of a self-agency. They chose it, they develop it, they explore it, they seek it in a way or another. In the second manifestation I named it necessity secularization. These were females who were, in terms of dress, they were secular, liberal dress, but they have this deep belief, they're strong believers in Islam, but they're facing religious struggles because on the one hand, they want to be more religious and dress religiously, but they distance themselves from religion and from religious dress due to necessity, and that relates to the political context of Israel. So for instance, this interviewee said, the fact that we live with Jews has an effect. I want to cover my head, but for work, that will make a difference. I have heard of lots of cases of racism against girls who wear the hijab. Society here demands more freedom or distance from religion. And in the beginning, she mentioned that if she was living in Saudi Arabia, for instance, she would have dressed differently and would have put the hijab on. So, but also, similar to the first manifestation, the girls in the first manifestation, they also mentioned that hijab does not imply the true level of religiosity of the person, because they mentioned about themselves, I'm not wearing the hijab, but I'm very, very religious, even to a larger extent than girls who are wearing the hijab. The third and final manifestation is what I named conservative liberation. These are secular females, very distant from religion, have very liberal views. They very much distance themselves from religion. For them, religion is merely something like a label, just like an ID number. They are independent, object religious traditions, but they are still adherent to Islam, and this is out of respect for their families. So one of them said, if it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't have a problem to marry someone who is not from my religion. You should respect the family you come from. So to conclude this discussion, it seems that the Muslim females, young adult females that I interviewed are sort of locked in the middle. Although by law, the Israeli law guarantees religious freedom for all, choosing, they do not enjoy this religious freedom practically because becoming religious, okay, in terms of choosing the inner religious circle, puts limitations on their personal development. But on the other hand, they also do not enjoy this full freedom of religion in terms of they are not free to distance themselves from religion because doing so would risk their familial ties. So to conclude, these findings basically contradict the common views of what is religiosity among Muslim females, and tapping into all the discussion about wearing the hijab, what does it mean if it's religious or not. Unlike Western views that contradict or put parallel between conservation and liberation, among these females, it seems that conservation is actually one form of liberation. They choose to be conservative. This is their own personal choice on the one hand. On the other hand, conservation could be a restraint on liberation because of the conservative background of these females cannot allow them to become or to actualize full liberty that they want to enjoy. And of course, it is important for future research to take into consideration all of the issue of the socio-political context when studying religious minorities and how this affect the different manifestations of religiosity. Thank you very much. I hope I managed the times, Ariella.
Yes, amazing. And I salute you and I really thank you because we have a distinguished professor, sociologist, Deborah Kaufman, who is the discussant, and we kind of shrank the time that we allude to her. But I just checked with our host, Karen Hutchison, who has been amazing, helping to facilitate this webinar. So thank you, Karen. So the announcement is that we can stay longer. So those who want to continue engaging with our speakers, first we're going to hear Deborah Kaufman, and then if we have time and if you want to continue and stay with us, please do so. So Deborah Kaufman, please. Deborah, unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I have 5 minutes to discuss these thoughtful, often nuanced presentations about women's experiences and motivations in traditional conservative, and I will use the word fundamentalist, Adina, religious and cultural communities. I do not know where to begin. Should I focus on Jocelyn Cesari's dichotomy between individual rights and rights of the self, one she claims is obscured by patriarchal norms and the politicization of Islam in both predominantly Muslim countries and among Muslim minorities? Or should I focus on Valentine Gadi's unconventional take on modesty among Haredi women, how they perform gender to mark the boundaries between themselves and the outside world, which means both non-Jews and non-Hasidic Jews, a slight twist on what we mean by secular, and how she cleverly employs some of Mara Benjamin's formulations of the concepts of the obligated self and of freedom as obligation in describing her respondents' challenges to liberal views of freedom, autonomy, and choice, a Kantian vision as freedom only achieved through full obligation? Or should I focus on Ilana Spencer's provocative claims that modesty laws reinforce a whitening process influenced by the rise of white Christian nationalism? Modesty laws transform the body into a site for power, control, and an ongoing whitening process, whereby Jewish communities shift from ethnic minorities into the American right wing. Or should I emphasize Adina Karp's focus on tensions between feminism and head covering and the varied reactions from indifference to religious commitments taking priority over feminist ones? Or finally, should I focus on Sasan Khair's claims that adult Muslim women in Israel embrace religious traditions and practices as expressions of personal autonomy and freedom? Or to caution that religious freedom is not only the liberty to practice religion, but the freedom to define one's relationship with religious values, traditions, and practices as well. No, I have no time for that. Perhaps Orit Avishai provides a theoretical twist that sums up some of the new trends in research on women in religious settings and mirrors in many ways the issues raised in today's webinar. She argues that sociological studies of women's experiences with conservative religions are typically framed by a paradox that ponders women's complicity. Indeed, the question that brought me to my own research and writing some 35 years ago was, why would women at the height of the feminist movement decide to become Ba'alot Teshuvah, returnees to Orthodox Judaism, often to Hasidic sects, the most patriarchal of religious traditions within Judaism? The prevailing view, writes Avishai, associates agency with strategic subjects who use religion to further extra-religious ends, but pays little attention to the cultural and institutional contexts that shape compliance. I do not agree with Avishai's critique, but I like her approach, which focuses on subjectivity and turns the research question on its head. Avishai offers an alternative framing to the study of women in conservative settings. Rather than asking why women comply, she examines agency as religious conduct and religiosity as a constructed status. Drawing on the classical article by West and Zimmerman, first published in 1987, entitled Doing Gender, Avishai explains religious women's agency as religious conduct, or the doing of religion. For her, doing religion is associated with a search for authentic religious subjecthood. For her, religiosity is shaped in accordance with the logic of one's religion and in the context of controlling messages about threatened symbolic boundaries and cultural others. In general, Avishai's approach gives short shrift to intersectionality, a twin concept of women's agency, and to the structure of power and decision-making within a variety of religious patriarchal contexts. On the other hand, she does a good job of shifting our focus to the subjective, everyday life of doing religion, an admirable feminist goal, I would say. I'd like to conclude by asking our panelists to answer as briefly as possible the following questions. These questions come from an ongoing project I have been grappling with over the past decades. Indeed, they are derived from the subject of my most recent piece in Contemporary Jewry, entitled Studying the World with Us in It, and Dorothy Smith was my mentor, Jewish Identities in the 21st Century. The questions are the following. What were, if any, the special challenges facing you when doing your research? What, if any, insider, outsider issues did you encounter? And finally, in one sentence, what do you believe to be the most important theoretical and/or methodological contribution, the study of gender, multiple genders, in conservative, traditional, fundamentalist, religious communities makes to the field of religious studies in general.
So if I may, since Sausan, you were at the end, kind of a squeeze at the end, would you like to be the first one? But unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I would be delighted to. So regarding the challenge that I faced, it's basically sort of focusing my research interviewees as minority students, the Muslim females, usually, at least here in the context of Israel, the issue of religion is less sort of related to in terms of their own personal psychological experience. So it was difficult for me to focus them. They were very enthusiastic about talking about their personal experiences, their religiosity, and many of them actually indicated that this made them think very much deeply into themselves and enlightening. And also the fact that I'm a psychologist maybe made them feel so confident in also sort of, you know, telling me stories unrelated to the study topic. So this was a real challenge for me. In terms of the insider-outsider, I think well, a question might rise here about not being a Muslim myself. I'm a Druze, but and this might, you know, raise questions. How was it to conduct this research? And I think very much I managed to overcome this, and it wasn't even an issue in terms of the interviews, because I'm a minority just like them. So as a researcher in Israel, when you deal with intercultural research, and specifically in terms of religion or politics, it's not about the religious background, it's more about your ethnicity. Are you an Arab or a Jew? So the only thing that I had also to deal with personally in this term is my own perspective on what they told me, being not being judgmental, actually, not, you know, judge what they said, because I'm coming from the same conservative background. So what not making the stance, neutral stance, not to make my thoughts affect the way that I analyze my data. And regarding the innovation in this research, again, there isn't much research on the personal religiosities of minority students in Israel, specifically Muslims. And this is one thing. The second is, as I said, that I contradict many Western views in the data that I found and in the data that I just presented to you. And this means that there is much still to be done. Thank you.
So who wants to also very briefly answer Deborah's question?
Can I just answer briefly? I'm not going to answer to everything. On the inside, outside, I have written a lot. I'm a Jewish woman working on Muslim women, and in my environment, I have siblings who are Muslim, so I've never had any insider, outsider. I feel like I belong to different communities, and I navigate them as comfortably as I can. The most challenging as a secular academic, I had a lot of problems with secular academics who cannot even fathom, you know, especially who are coming from France, that these religious women have agency. I'm not talking about the public, I'm talking about the academia. About the theory, I mean, and this goes beyond the gender. What I've been trying to do in the last 15 years is to decenter the look of religion to the individual or the person only, and to take into account that for lots of people who are religious, the safety, the survival of what we call in anthropology the revelation-based community takes precedence over what we could call expression or empowerment of the self in all aspects. And it came very strongly in the talk of Adina, Valentina. This is not something imposed on people. This is something duly, completely chosen. And again, I would push back against words like conservative, fundamentalist, because they do not echo with this capacity of empowerment that lots of religious people, and again, not only the women, this also applies to men. There is also, I mean, there are lots of work done here to rescale what makes me, as they say in Arabic, Kamil, complete. What makes me complete is being part of this community. It's not exerting my freedom of choice in all aspects. And in this regard, there is a religious individualization that in sociology of religion, we have tended to neglect, in the sense that we think individualization goes with secularization. I think we have work to do on that, and I stop here.
Anybody else?
I'm happy to go next.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to also take on the insider-outsider question. To me, it's been something, I think I kind of touched on it in my presentation, because I realized in the process of this work how crucial these understandings of the researcher's role in the analysis is to understanding the research. There was a great comment about that that I just replied to, but it's been really interesting hearing feedback from the community that I'm deeply embedded in, that I'm studying, about my work. And that's maybe the difficulty of it as well. It's not quite the subjectivity lens, right? It's more the looking at the ruling relation lens, which, if I'm understanding correctly, is within the realm of standpoint theory. I'm a newer scholar, so feel free to push back on that. But it's been a lot of paradoxes and contradictions, trying to understand how to make sense of the ways that women's bodies are positioned in a broader political discourse, while also understanding people's individual feelings about where they would like to associate or what they're taking on when they take on modesty practices. I've had so many people, I was actually expecting this question, but ask me, why don't I compare Jewish modesty practices with Muslim practices? Like, people in the Jewish community feel very strongly like their modesty practices relate more to Muslim modesty practices. And I think that Jocelyn's presentation actually answered that for me very well. The Jewish communities are not under the same kind of post-colonial rule or racialization in the US that the Muslim communities are. So these are wildly different contexts. And the subjectivity outward approach doesn't quite capture that. So I needed a different vantage point. For myself, I think that, I occupy a unique space as somebody who was raised partly secular and partly in the community. And I have many different perspectives that I bring to bear in this work. I like to imagine, anyway, that my vantage point is one of many, and one that offers a really unique angle to it as well, as somebody who has deep investments and commitments and feels protective of the community, while also having somewhat of an outsider perspective as somebody who's deeply embedded as well in the outside cultures that boundary work does so much work of insulating from. I see the porousness in a way that I think I uniquely can, which deeply informs my work and how I read the texts that I do. So there's been no way to differentiate the question of insider-outsider status from the epistemological stance that I take in analyzing my work. So thank you so much for asking that question. it's been really generative to think about it this way.
So I want to thank Ilana that kind of highlighted, in what ways these comparatives between the communities, that comparing Jewish women and Muslim women was kind of helpful, or not. And I wonder if there's anybody who wants to add to that, maybe another point of view to what Ilana said. In what ways, if at all, it was helpful for you hearing others thinking about the other presentations as us as a team, let's say, of although we kind of put it together, not necessarily that we started the research together, but here we are on sharing the floor or the screens.
Maybe I can say something. First of all, I want to apologize. I will be brief, and I took my presentation took too long. So thank you for your patience. I was thinking while Ilana was speaking and while she was presenting, because studying Orthodox Jewish women and so talking about Jewishness, I found it very inspiring. And as I mentioned, the work of Saba Mahmoud, but even other scholars working on Muslim women. When Jocelyn was talking, I was thinking about Martina, Amélie Renard, who work on women in Saudi Arabia. And this kind of work for me were inspiring, because I do think that there is a point of contact in exactly what Jocelyn was saying, the idea that the survival of the community and not only and that the connection with something bigger comes before the empowerment and the individual will. So there is a point of contact for me between the experience of Jewish women I'm talking to and the research I read about different kind of Muslim women. And as Jocelyn mentioned, there is many different experience on the base of what we are talking about, which country, if it's in a minority context or if it's a majority. So Ilana's presentation for me, it's and it's not the first time I hear it. I think there is something very stimulating, and there is good insights regarding whiteness. But as per my research, I still one of the conclusions I come to is that somehow, especially Orthodox Jews are not white, and they embody something, a kind of difference that does not fit exactly in this dichotomy or in this color line. And so I'm trying to if they go and pick up on something that is related to whiteness, it doesn't completely fit. So for me, I'm not fully comfortable, but they are rationalized in a way that is specific to Jewish people, and it's a way that for me there is a point of contact between Orthodox Jews and Israeli somehow. I'm not going to go into that, we can talk about it, but there are the Jewish people that cannot somehow hide. Their Jewishness is out there. And just briefly on the insider outsider, because that was my challenge. So it's one question it's two questions in one answer. That was my challenge. I am an Italian Catholic born who's married to an Israeli and went through a Orthodox conversion process. So I live in the neighborhood, and I have neighbors who are Hasidic and are not, but I was hanging out with these women, going to their holidays, to their life events, to going out in the neighborhood. So I kind of befriended these women, and some of them became my friends. Some of them are part of my support system, but at the same time, I'm not fully part of their communities. And I'm not, and I'm doing a research. So the challenge was how to walk this thin line of having their trust, having them sharing very personal thing with me, but reminding them that, yes, I'm a friend, but I'm also doing a research. So it's really walking a thin line. So it's not an inside outside. It's always a moving position.
Anybody else wants to I mean, we can keep on going, but I respect our audience that might have other commitment, and we promised to finish at 1:30, and we kind of dragged it a little bit, but it seems as though that it's a beginning, and I thank everybody. The chat is active. I mean, I don't, I thank the speakers that engaged with the questions. So I think part of the recording, the chats, the questions, and the answers, and the comments will be available for everyone. And I hope that by writing to our wonderful speakers, we can continue these discussions. Perhaps it will become a session at SSR or one of our Jewish conferences, annual conferences. This ought to be continued, and it seems as though that I hope that kind of both, it's not like only insider and outsider, but the young and older scholars hopefully collaborating and learning from each other can really grow the field. If anybody wants, Deborah, do you want to say anything before we say goodbye? Do you have any other wisdom from your really rich experience?
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists. We went from macro analysis, Muslim across countries, to micro nail polish. And I think it said two things about this panel, which I hope, as you do, Ariel, will continue in discussion. One is that the interdisciplinary nature of the research and how interesting that is, how we're borrowing, and that grows increasingly true for social scientists and others. So I find that wonderful in this group. And also, many of the comments, it's not just interdisciplinary, but here's where I think intersectional analysis would be really helpful, looking at the ways in which place, circumstance, age come together to define us as individuals, but also to understand the social organization of power and communication within that. So I see this as I think this is a wonderful start, and I was very impressed. Thank you all.
So thank you so much.
Also, I just want to say I would be happy to, if people want to communicate, I'd be happy to do so. If you want to try an idea out or something, I'm retired and open for this conversation.
So this will be continued, I promise you, and feel free to contact us, suggest and really so we can submit something. It's always good to submit a session or panel to annual conference, and I see a lot of opportunities here. So everyone who stayed with us longer than we promised, thank you so much, and hope to see you, I guess, in Pittsburgh very, very soon. Have a happy and safe summer. Thanks.